video again. It's been a pretty mental week this week. We've had a load of castings arrive here. The just stuff for the Dreamstone Kickstarter has finally arrived, which is very, very exciting. So I'm in the middle of painting that up, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, and I'm advertising now. That's how clear how clear I am that the Kickstarter for that is going to be starting up on the 1st of July. So that's in a week's time. Yeah, July already. It's mental, isn't it? So yeah, that's in a week's time. So next week's video is probably going to be a bit of a look at how that's going together, and then I should be pretty busy with managing that campaign, but we should try to get a video in the next week as well. But rather than show you the painting that I'm doing on that, I thought we'd carry on with our series looking at warbands in the woods. And this week we're going to look at Tuatha warbands, the human warbands in the rule set. And they come in two types. They're the only race, if you like, that currently has two warbands connected to them. They are the Boars, the Sounders, and the Wulver colts. And the Sounder warbands are very much your baseline warband. They're distinctly average in all respects, as you might expect from a human warband. I think most fantasy settings, if you have a look at the human stat line, that's like totally average, and everything else builds up from there, and we've gone with that as well. But they have an advantage that they are cheap. You will not find a troop type cheaper than the Sealk, which is the bog standard Tuatha soldier in the rulebook. They are the cheapest around, and that means that you can build warbands of 10 to 12 miniatures, which in the woods is quite big. So they have a very definite advantage there numerically, which we'll come back to a little while later. They do have some hard-hitting troops. They have the Fedrink and the I'm going to say how to pronounce this, Caempa. Anyone who speaks Irish, tell me how to pronounce that. The Semper, and we'll go with that. The Semper. See, people who ask me how to pronounce these things, I don't know how to pronounce them. They just look good on paper. The Semper. They're the kind of elite troops, and they do give you some options, but they're a bit more in line with the costs of other troops in the book. So not exactly expensive, but not the cheapest around. But Tuatha warbands are the best for giving you a variety to build off of. And part of the reason for that is that we don't sell human figures to go in the woods, because there are so many companies that are doing Dark Age miniatures. And we want people to be able to use whatever Dark Age miniatures they have to start off playing games in the woods. So we want people to be able to arm their Tuatha warbands as Vikings, as Saxons, as Gauls, as whatever you have that you want to use, whatever your models are armed with, are equipped with. We want people to be able to use those. So you've got the option of taking shields, you've got the option of taking armor, you've got the option of taking spears, you can take slings, you can take bows, obviously axes and swords. So they're very versatile. And the Torkalaks, the chieftains of the Boars, who are like these outcast Tuatha groups wandering in the wilderness. Their chieftains start off with just the same basic profile as a Skalk. They're very average, but they're not cheap to build up. They have a fairly moderate price, but they have a lot of things that you can customize. So you can basically make your chieftain whatever you want your chieftain to be. The real benefit of a Tuatha warband, in addition to its numbers, is its ability to take cheap missile weapons. So Sealks come with slings as standard, and the option to take bows at just +2 points. So it's not expensive to give your warbands some very definite missile capability. And the way that missile fire works in the woods is not necessarily to cause a great deal of damage. you're going to be knocking 1 or 2 points of endurance off with a hit. So it's going to take you a little while to wear down troops, unless you've got a mass of 10 scouts firing at the same time, and then okay, it'll do some damage. But that will really wear down your opponent's stamina, and that's what missile fire does. It makes it harder for your opponents to do things during their activation, because their stamina will be worn down by being under repeated missile fire. You would think that having very average troops armed with missile weapons might make them pretty poor in combat, because that seems to be the way in quite a lot of rule sets. You've got missile troops who are good at a range, but getting close and they're pretty terrible. But because they're cheap, because you can take more of them, as long as you can keep them together so that they can support each other, they're actually fairly good at standing up in combat. You might lose a few points of endurance in the first round with 1 or 2 of your miniatures, but a group of 2 or 3, well, no, 3 or 4 troops together against a really powerful enemy, or 2 or 3 together against an average enemy, is a much better advantage than having one powerful model wading into combat. We are going to be looking at powerful Tuatha heroes, this is in like Finn McCool kind of slaying his hundreds and thousands in the supplement that's coming up. But in the rulebook there aren't these powerful heroes, but their numbers definitely add up to a decent capability in combat. There's a wide availability of shields, which also helps give you an extra point of engagement in combat, so it's not so easy to wide space them. And because you've got possibly 10, possibly 12 models in a warband, it's easy to form those up into 3 companies and march around the battlefield with people offering decent protection. Companies is very much something that the Tuatha focus on and work on. Numerically, if you're going to form up a company, you need to be able to have several of them on the go, otherwise you're going to be very limited to what you're going to do in terms of achieving objectives. But companies give you a lot more durability. You've got models watching each other's backs. That's essentially a unit in cohesion that's all acting together, but it gives you a better line of defense against attack. Particularly if you've got shields, you can create a shield wall out of your company and stop opponents from getting through. It also helps you control a particular area and prevent your opponents from breaking through to that, so it gives you some quite good holding abilities. Wulver cults, who are the other type of Tuatha warband, there's a bit of a trade-off there. They're not quite as cheap, and you lose the missile capability and you lose the ability to form companies, because the Wulver worshippers, the Wulver warriors, have this lone wolf trait, which means that they can't form companies. They act independently. They're very much sort of solo fighters. But you get wolf skins, and you get the ability to take skills like vigilance, which mean that you can do relational actions as instinctive reactions. So it means that if you're forced to react, you've got access to a wide range of other actions that you can stick in there. For instance, you can hide. Normally, if you're going to hide as part of a reaction, perhaps to avoid missile fire, or fake leaving action, or being targeted by an attack, that would be a dive out of the way, and you'd end up hidden and not be able to target, but you'd also end up prone and probably losing your next activation unless you've got people clustered in nice and close together. But because the vigilance skill lets you hide as an instinctive reaction, it means that as long as you're using cover well, you should always be able to just duck out of the way and then be able to get up and keep going in your next activation. So that's very, very useful. The wolf skin also gives them a bonus. Sorry, tripping over my words. Gives them a bonus to their menace. It doesn't give them an aura of fear, so it doesn't mean that people instinctively run away from them. but it does make group intimidation actions. Lots of Wulver cult members coming out of the woods from different angles against a target can be quite effective. So that's going to be particularly useful if you've got people who are guarding a horde or guarding totems or objectives that you want to try and get to. So while we're talking about objectives, the objectives that Tuatha are quite good at, well, they're average. So as you would expect, they're fairly average at doing most things. There isn't really anything that they will massively struggle to do. They're possibly not so good at escaping, because you've got quite a large warband, or potentially got quite a large warband. You could have quite a small focused warband, and then that wouldn't be a problem at all. But if you've got a large warband, it's harder to get them all safely across the table. They're also going to struggle to react to very focused attacks. So if you've got your opponent's entire warband is focused on one objective, the Tuatha are not necessarily going to be that good at defending. So if you've got everyone opposing you out to steal or to do revenge on a particular model, the rest of the warband is going to have weak chinks in it. But by forming companies and using shield walls, you can defend. If you can work out which model it is that they're trying to get to, you can work a way of defending it. So that's not necessarily impossible. But the things that they tend to do really well are observing, particularly the Wulver cult with their ability to hide and to just lurk and pop out and do what they need to do, and then run away again. And you've got large numbers of models, relatively large for the woods, so you've got a wider sweep. You can observe more things. Counting coup, go into combat with multiple models. Most of them are going to get away from that, so you'll be able to do hit and run fairly easily. But you might have to sacrifice a couple of models, because not everyone is going to get out of that. If you've got 3 people going into a combat, 2 of them will be able to run away fine. You might lose 1, or at least need to be prepared to rescue them on a subsequent turn. Things where you can split up your warband into groups and identify objectives to undertake as groups. So things like totem and defile, fine, great, good, and things like guardians and horde, especially guardians with Wulver cult, because of their menace capability. That kind of area control, taking an area of the battlefield and denying it to your opponents, is something that a Tuatha warband will be able to do very easily. So I hope that's useful. It may seem quite dull to play a human warband in a fantasy setting, but actually it's quite a lot of fun playing Tuatha warbands. I've played a lot of games as Tuatha, and because they are very flexible, because they're not quite as specialised as a lot of the other races, they respond a lot easier to unexpected circumstances. You can make them do things that other warbands struggle to do mid game. So they are worth playing with. They also work very well, Tuatha warbands on Tuatha warbands, being quite balanced, but being able to vary their composition so that you've got a more specialised warband of one type and a more specialised warband of another type facing each other. So if you are looking to play sort of straight up Dark Age stuff, or you only have Dark Age historical miniatures, that doesn't put you at a disadvantage for playing this rule set, because you've got that ability to vary your Tuatha. So as I say, next week will be the Dreamstone launch. Hopefully, fingers crossed, if all goes well. So look out for that. I hope you have a good time in the meantime. Hope you have good weeks, and I will catch you next week.